Chapter 37. Liberation Day 2 Summary. Delula had unhooked her from all the monitoring equipment a few hours earlier in the day. She had been asked to wait in the recovery room. Someone would be around later to retrieve her. She hoped it would be Oleander and was a little disappointed he wasn't around when she woke up. She knew better than to expect that from him, but it would have been nice. She was passively aware of the movements of the Cletharians. No active involvement was needed right now, but if anything changed, she'd feel it. Her strongest link to the collective was Shelley. Louis was on board some ship the baby Weaver had control of. There were Darklings on the ship with him. It was an odd situation, but it helped compensate for her lack of standard telepathy. The alien gland inside her skull wasn't as she remembered. It was different from Kivasa's Queen's Mark, which made sense. Her sisters had regenerated after consuming a mutation core, but the original, created by the old Queen, was now part of Sam's brain. It didn't activate fully until a consciousness, that identified itself as Kayla, bequeathed her a memory from the former Queen. Carly could only maintain connections with 3 Weavers at a time. Samari had no such limitation. She was able to communicate with the Weavers using mystrionics instead of psionics, and they were always connected. It was distracting at times, but like chronic tinnitus, she'd just have to learn to live with it. Granted, the buzzing sensation she was experiencing was not auditory. She pouted as she gently traced the scar on the top of her head. The graft had taken nicely. They had done what they could to speed the healing process and reduce scarring. It would still be tender for a while. Delula had arranged for regular medical nanite injections until the healing process was complete. Sam planned on asking Nelfree to come back to the station with her to oversee her ongoing recovery, but was worried how her friend would react. At least, she hoped Nelfree was still her friend. This arrangement may have been necessary but felt needlessly cruel in its execution. The justification of "I'm just doing what must be done" may work for Carly, but it troubled Samari deeply. Sometimes her sister seemed to have the emotional depth of a lamentic. Sam stared down at the ring on her left hand and sighed. When she teased Oleander about wanting him to put a ring on her finger, this wasn't at all what she meant. It was a plain white band made from some kind of bone. It was not given with some dedication or promise between the two of them, but it was an oath ring, meant to enforce her oath to never wage war against the Lamentic Empire. It was a condition of the surgery. When he took her hand and asked her to make him a promise before he slid it on her finger, she had no idea what it was. He told her after the fact. That ring was now bound to her finger. She couldn't remove it, and it would mystically jump to another if she lost her middle finger. Violating the oath would result in an immediate and rather unpleasant death. Lamentics may not experience emotions the same way Terrans do, but he still should have known how much that would hurt her. As upset as she was, the original Samari's feelings for him ran so deep that she couldn't bring herself to hate him for it, but the instincts she attributed to Kayla's former life demanded retribution. The door was open. When did that happen? Was she so lost in her thoughts she hadn't even noticed? Her head whipped to the side in response to a glimpse of movement in the corner of her eye. There was someone hiding behind a chair on one side of the room. They were child-sized, just crouching behind the chair, watching her. She could only see the right side of their head. Sam could just barely make out one moonstone-colored eye peeking out from behind their unkempt white hair. Their skin was a few shades darker than typical Lamentics, with an uncharacteristic pinkish undertone. The black eyelashes and eyebrows were a strong indicator of mixed heritage. It was odd. Normally she'd have some sense of not being alone, but that wasn't the case. This child had no real presence. They looked like a porcelain doll. Sam thought they were a little girl, but they could be a boy with classically feminine features. They both sat for a few minutes, staring at one another in silence. Samari had almost convinced herself she was looking at some kind of automaton and not a real child until they finally blinked. "Hi, sweetie," Samari said with a warm smile. I don't think you're supposed to be in here. Are you playing a hiding game? They lowered their heads slightly and looked away. It wasn't quite a yes or a no, but they were definitely trying to hide, and seemed curious. Can you talk? They hid completely behind the chair. Samari didn't know how to interpret their response until she heard gentle footfalls echoing down the adjoining hallway. Don't worry, Sam soothed. You can hide in here if you want. I won't tell anyone I saw you. A small black moth flitted out from behind the chair. Sam walked to the open doorway to see who was coming. It was just Oleander. I'm still mad at you, Sam called down the hallway, while holding up her middle finger to show off her unwanted jewelry. Sam stood cater-corner to the room, prepared to intercept him if needed. Don't start, Oleander snapped. Today's not a good day for verbal sparring matches. You can be so nice and sweet, Samari said mockingly. I just wish it lasted longer than it takes you to pull out. He halted his trek to the room and stood in the hall glaring at her. If you had any idea what I've had to endure while you were out, he began to say. I spent my morning dealing with a colmion over mind. If I made the wrong move, a couple dozen star systems would be fucked. I wish my only concern was where to shove your cock. Sam flushed. That remark didn't end where she intended. It didn't seem to matter how upset she was with him. The depths of the original Samari's desire kept getting in the way, sending a barrage of excuses flooding through her head in a desperate attempt to pardon his behavior. Without thinking, Samari swatted at the moth as it landed on her ear. She thought she heard it faintly whisper something just before it died, but what reason would a moth have to thank her? Given the choice between one colmion and 3 upset women, he started. The overmind is part of a collective of thousands, Sam scoffed. I hope you remember to include me in your list of women that want to strangle you. They're frustrated, Oleander chuckled dryly. I can add you to my catalogue of women who want to choke me to death if you'd like. You'll be in good company. It's a much longer list. Sam scolded herself silently for almost laughing. Can we go home? Sam asked. I'm worried about Yari and my friends. Not yet, he grumbled. I wish we could. This entire arrangement has been terrible, Samari stomped her foot. Other than you and the medical staff, I haven't seen anyone since we arrived. I know we're not the only ones here. Using Kobe Tamj, I can hear them. Why is everyone avoiding me? If I wasn't wearing this stupid ring, I'd call Cletheria and tell them to come get me out of here. If you want me to feel bad about putting that ring on your finger, Oleander snickered as he started walking toward her, you're taking the wrong approach. At least tell me why I can't leave. You can, Oleander said irritably. I can't. Unfortunately, we don't have any agents on Hyrule who can walk you through the curtain. I can go through as long as I'm holding a Lamentic's hand, right? Sam asked. Can't I leave with someone else? It's more complicated than that, Oleander sighed as he drew closer. Anyone here can bring you to Yarrows. The tricky part is returning you to Hyrule. You can only leave Yarrows through the same curtain you entered through, unless you're using someone else's anchor point. The first Lamentic through sets the anchor point, so I'm still anchored to Hyrule, unless I walk through the curtain here alone. What about Briar? Sam asked. I walked through the curtain first on the way to Yarrows, and she was first on the way here. She didn't stick around. She's been brought home by a member of her house by now. Unless you can arrange for some Lamentic that just happens to be on Hyrule to bring you back from Yarrows, you're stuck here until they're ready to let me leave. When will that be? Not until Fury stays pregnant, Oleander sounded angry. Samari took a step toward him before he got close enough to see into the room. What do you mean by that? We're not entirely sure. Oleander shrugged. The doctor verifies she's pregnant. After a few hours, her body rejects it. This time Delula's been instructed to run additional tests on the discharge. Hopefully, we'll be able to find out what's wrong with her. You're blaming it on her? Sam balked. You know I've sired dozens of children, Oleander smirked. Fury has never been bred. Her brother, Irelan, has been looking for someone to blame. I'm just tired of listening to it. I've gotten results, she just isn't staying pregnant. This is Ganon's house, and he wants Fury to have a child. If it was just a numbers game, they wouldn't have insisted Jules abort hers. What? Sam gaped. I'm here under an agreement between House Nazgûli and Atom, Oleander shrugged. Jules isn't covered under that arrangement. She's a hybrid. Any offspring would be considered part of House Orwell, which would involve Nazgûli making concessions to House Orwell. Mating outside of the Atom breeding program is complicated and highly political. Have I ever told you how much I hate Lamentic culture? Sam grumbled. I doubt the critique from a queen of Cletheria would carry much weight, Oleander chortled. At least you finally came to check on me, Sam smiled. Honestly, he said sheepishly, I was sent to retrieve you. She pouted. Ganon would like to meet you, Oleander said unhappily. Looking like this, Sam said while tugging at her hospital gown. Don't worry, Oleander chuckled, we'll be stopping so you can change into something more appropriate. I even found a wig you can wear if you'd like. Should I even ask? Sam sighed. Yes, it's white, Oleander laughed as he held out his hand to her. She was too distracted remembering the way Briar had spoken of Ganon. Samari really did want to meet him, and Oleander's obvious displeasure with the idea made her even more curious. He withdrew his hand, asked her to follow him, and led her to a room where she could get changed. Do you need any help getting dressed? Oleander asked playfully as he opened the door for her. Wig. Look on the vanity, Oleander said. You can close that door any time now, Samari snickered as she sauntered over to the changing area. He closed it without protesting, although he looked like he was about to. Samari took her time getting dressed. She wanted to make sure everything was in its place. House Nazgûli was one of the oldest among the great houses, but had been in decline when Ganon took over as the head of the house a few centuries ago. Under his leadership, they'd steadily rose through the ranks to become the fifth-rated house. Being asked to meet with him was a big deal to her, even knowing full well it was the new Cletherian queen he was interested in, not Samari Alaru. The colors of House Nazgûli were silver and dark blue. The clothing Cyanide had made for her were imperial red and gold, with exception of the leather bits. Sam appreciated the tactical value of the color choice. She was dressed like a representative of the High Court. Not many Lamentics were permitted to wear these colors, and the dyes required to get this specific hue weren't publicly available. The significance would be lost on most people. Anyone with an in-depth understanding of Lamentic traditions would see those colors as a warning that she was either in service to, or under the protection of the High Court. The dye tended to fade if not treated every few months, but she planned to enjoy it while it lasted. Samari glared at the closed door while examining the wig. It was not quite chin length and shaped like the inside of a snifter glass. The contrast between her rich tan skin and the white hair made her look a bit peaked. It might have been cute on someone with a rounder face, but it was an unflattering style on her. Was Oleander trying to sabotage her? She'd look better if she wrapped her skirt around her head. Actually, that wasn't a bad idea. It would certainly look better than that wig. She dropped it on the counter with disgust, marched over to the door, and demanded Oleander go find her something she could use as a scarf. With so many different knacks you'd think someone must have come up with a way to swiftly regrow hair. Then again, maybe someone did and it was some black church secret technique being suppressed by corporate interests involved with hair replacement therapies. It sounded stupid, but stranger things had happened. Somewhere on Midguard there was a Mystrionics-powered crystal nightlight. It could talk while following you around and was named Clarence. It just went to show, the true depths of inanity are known to someone, just not admitted. Given his rank in the Black Church, Oleander should be able to find out if an ability like that existed. Sam wondered if he could explain that weird butterfly. The phenomena must be knack-related. Samsar could communicate with some creatures telepathically, but that moth actually spoke. She was sure of it. Will this work? Oleander asked as he opened the door. Just barging in, Samari scolded. You should have knocked. What could I possibly see that I haven't already seen? Oleander chided. I don't understand the issue. I could have been wearing that ugly wig. Sam smiled as she walked over and took the scarf from his outstretched hand. It can't be that bad, Oleander chuckled. Sam sighed as she prepared to wrap the scarf around her head. It is, and no, I won't put it on to show you. I didn't ask, he countered. You were going to, Sam snickered. Don't bother denying it. I know you. He didn't deny it. Why brown, or was it just what you found first? Sam asked as she finished adjusting her head covering. I borrowed it from Artemia. She has a collection of hip scarves. It was the closest to your natural hair color. If she thinks this is a hip scarf, she's doing it wrong, Samari scoffed. There are no coins, beads, sequins, or even tassels. Ask any Samsaran dancer, wrapping an oversized scarf around your waist doesn't make it a hip scarf. That reminds me, Oleander said, grinning broadly, once the Echelon government announces the plague has ended and reopens the system, would you like me to bring you to pick out new Silkandi dance gear? I'd like that, Sam blushed. I've ordered new armor, but it'll be boring without the extra flair. Oh, I'll need a new set of bladed dance fans, too. No, you won't, he said while backing out of the doorway and motioning for her to follow him. That oath ring isn't the only thing I picked up while I was rummaging through that black church vault. This is why it would never work between us, Samari teased. You're supposed to shower me with gifts before we have sex. That reminds me, have you bought replacements for those restraints yet? Oleander asked. No, Sam admitted sheepishly, I forgot. She mentally mapped the hallways as they made their way through the compound. She expected there to be guards or people walking around, but didn't see anyone. It may just be her current status as a Cletherian queen, or her recent contact with Colmia, but House Nazgûli must be going to great lengths to prevent chance interactions. Cletherians were known for being powerful telepaths. It may just be security concerns, but was entirely unnecessary. I've been using a mystrionic ability to communicate with the Cletherian hive mind, Sam said apprehensively. Implanting that gland in my head didn't give me access to another knack. I'm still not a psionicist. Where is everyone? This is really starting to creep me out. Is everyone hiding from me? They're acting like I'm the carrier of some weird plague. Nobody really knows what that thing in your head is or does. They're just being cautious, Oleander said without inflection. Once Ganon meets you, I'm sure they'll re-evaluate the security protocols. I just don't feel welcome here, Sam said sadly. I'm not sure why you'd want to, Oleander chuckled while looking over his shoulder at her. Seeing as you brought up the Black Church earlier, Samari said, I have some questions. Go ahead, he answered. I'll answer if I can. Why hasn't anyone developed a way to regrow hair quickly? She asked. Oleander laughed. I should have guessed it was hair-related. That's not an answer. It can be done, he chuckled, but it's not worth the trouble. I'll be the judge of that, she retorted. Kobe Tamj. Transmute self, Oleander said. Never heard of it, Sam remarked. He turned to face her and walked backward while saying, I'm not surprised. It's mostly a lost art used to disguise someone's appearance and body shape. I've been told it's a slow and uncomfortable process. So, not worth the trouble. I could try to locate a treatise on it if you're interested. Can it be used to change your gender? Sam asked quizzically. Most likely, Oleander scoffed, but that's not how I'd want to be with one of the UN perfected. I may be many things, but desperate isn't one of them. Not everything is about you, Samari chided. Don't quote me on this, but I'm fairly sure it can't alter your overall body mass or change your bone structure, so you could try looking like Kali, but the tails wouldn't be functional. Okay, you're right, Sam grudgingly admitted. It's not worth the trouble. Oleander chuckled as he spun back around. Every knack has its strengths and weaknesses, Sam redirected while trying to obscure her intent. For example, telepathy makes private speech easy. It can be done with mystrionics too, but less effectively. If you've got Kobe Tamj, you're just out of luck. It's the magic of the body, and not suited to things like that. Sure it is, if you think about it. Sound imitation can alter any sound you make, spoken or not. You can make it sound like you're unsheathing a dagger when you unfasten your robe, or simulate speech while tapping your finger by someone's ear with enough practice. I never thought of that, Sam said excitedly. What about the other knacks, the rarest ones? I've met law practitioners who can make plants sing, or use the air currents like I tend to. Dark force is different. It's the only knack that can emulate soul touch. I guess they could use that. We used to call it umbrifery because of how many of the abilities manipulate shadows, but the name never caught on among the general public. While not quite the answer she was hoping for, it was enough. That weird whispering butterfly must have been conjured by that lamentic child using some sort of dark force ability. What kind of place is this? Sam asked. I've seen 3 rooms and lots of hallways. I know there are other people here. Were they sent away, or being hidden somewhere? This is making me really uncomfortable. I spent years dreading my telepathic abilities, but now I want them back. The samsara and abilities I inherited with this body only work with underdeveloped minds. It's so quiet. There aren't even any animals here. All I can hear is the sound of our feet echoing down these endless white hallways. Well, that and what? Oleander asked. She didn't need to see his face to know he was grinning. I don't mind the collective, it's just a murmur. I can't even hear all of them. The Darklings are using Louis and the Weavers to bridge the divide until I get used to the feel of their thoughts. It's not at all like it was before. Oleander stopped walking, spun to face her, and asked, Are you alright? Do Colmians ever shut the fuck up? Samari growled. They can't even think to me directly. It's all being relayed through the Weavers. If I ever get to the point that every word out of my mouth is self-aggrandizing posturing, please put me out of everyone's misery. He looked at her with genuine sorrow in his eyes. If you keep looking at me like that, Samari taunted, I might start thinking you really do care. You should know better than that, Oleander scolded. Sam's mind raced. There were so many different ways she could take that. There were some memories of the original Samari left roaming around in her brain, but she wasn't even convinced his lackadaisical phrasing would have provided her any real insight, unless he meant. I know Lamentics experience emotion differently, Sam asked nervously. Was that your way of not being able to express yourself, or insisting I should know you only care until you've pulled out? You're not my Samari anymore, Oleander said while walking backward so he could keep facing her. Separating the feeling I held for her from whatever feeling I may develop toward you will take time to untangle. Sam said nothing. So far, you've not disappointed, Oleander quipped. I didn't have much experience in my last life, Sam blushed. Some of that was left over from old Sam, and the rest was just instinctive, I think. You have good instincts, he chuckled softly. Her face warmed and his grin widened. Where are the children? She asked. Right where we left them, I'd imagine. I've been doing what I can to keep Tyrell updated, Oleander said with a faint glint in his eyes. Although I can't guarantee he's had time to keep the twins updated. A member of my staff has been distracting him. She wasn't talking about the twins, but he'd managed to completely derail her attempt to fish for information. Wait, are you telling me he made a move on one of the women from your crew? I wouldn't say that. She made the first move, but it was obvious where his wandering eyes were focusing. Did she have blinking nipples? Sam laughed. No, it was Blight. He must be an ass man, Oleander smiled. I can ask her to try that if the tests come back negative. Tests. We checked into his last genetics profile after docking, Oleander said emotionlessly. He has the markers needed to produce offspring with a lamentic or hybrid. We're hoping to breed for another cyberpath eligible for security clearance. So, I selected a team to coordinate with him that would increase the likelihood of that outcome. I didn't expect him to go for Blight. That was a surprise. It's all about breeding with you, isn't it? Sam scoffed. He flashed her a crooked grin, then turned back around while saying, "Not with you it isn't. Please, don't forget that. You're not just some assignment, even if a strong motivator is getting to know who's taken over ownership of that body." I'm sure being a Cletherian queen isn't a factor, Sam sighed dramatically. Of course not, he chuckled softly, but you weren't until today. Don't worry, I'm not the sort to be scared off by strong women. Really? Sam scoffed. I've seen you around at least 2 unperfected women now. When I'm outmatched, Oleander chuckled, I don't see that it matters what's between their thighs. Well, unless they want me there and meet my criteria. Sam withheld her retort. The conversation about Delphine at the War Council, and his apparent dissatisfaction with his current assignment betrayed he had standards but was bound by responsibilities to his noble house. Everyone is someone's puppet some of the time, Sam muttered under her breath, echoing words Cyanide had once spoken. What was that? Oleander asked. Just something Cyan said to the other me, Sam said wistfully. Without the puppeteer, you lose direction, and without those strings, you lose the ability to dance. Strings? It was part of a marionette analogy, Sam added. Oh, is that all? He said without turning to look at her. Speaking of which, I noticed that rash on your wrists cleared up nicely. Samari bit her lower lip and blushed before responding. That's completely different. I needed to be restrained so you could help me break through the psionic conditioning. Oh, is that all it was? Oleander chided. Maybe I should cancel my order for replacements for the shackles we used that night. You better not, Sam snapped before realizing she was speaking. Oleander clicked his tongue as they passed by a wide adjoining hallway with a red curtain at its far end. Sam recognized it was the passage back to Yarrow's. They were nearing an ornate door by the end of the passage they'd been traversing. His muscles seemed to tighten more and more with each step. How long have I been staring at his ass? Samari scolded herself quietly, but in her defense, there wasn't much else to look at. What? Oleander asked. I think I'm starting to get a feel for the layout here, Sam noted, but where are they hiding everyone else? It's not fair to them or the other children. He spun around to face her, with a stern look on his face and an intense look in his eyes. Samari, understand this. There are no children here. But, I saw. No, you didn't, Oleander insisted. Keep those thoughts out of your head and don't speak of this again. You choose now to start lying to me, Sam snarled. You're not telepathic. Don't stand there presuming you know what's in my head. I may not be able to access those abilities, but Ganon can, Oleander said coldly. Please, not another word or thought about children that do not exist. He rested his palm against the closed door at the end of the hallway. His body language made it clear that he wasn't opening that door until she agreed to keep quiet. The only way back is through Yarrow's, Sam grumbled. I hope the head of House Nazgûl doesn't think Cletheria will permit me to be held here against my will. This ring on my finger may prevent me from waging war with the Empire, but I paid attention while my sister was with Cyanide. Intent and interpretation matter. If I instruct them to bring me home, but don't specify how. What do you think will happen next? I'm not waging war, am I? Any resulting conflict would simply be the unintended consequences of someone else's actions. Oleander scowled. When I touch you, I can feel a flickering spark of who she was that remains within you, but each day, you're less and less like the Samari I once knew. Inform Ganon that I've lost interest in meeting with him or his great house, Sam said angrily. Oleander's words had hurt her more deeply than she could have anticipated. Dealing with him was like standing on an emotional pendulum swinging eternally from one extreme to the next. She wanted to love him, hate him, please him, choke the life out of him, hold him tightly, and push him away. He had a talent for damning himself with one sentence and redeeming himself in the next. If that's really what you want, he said in an even tone, I'll let him know. Damn you, she whispered just loud enough to be heard. We're both stuck here until my assigned task is complete, Oleander said irritably. Make no mistake. I'm not a welcome guest here. Their bloodline has grown too narrow. They needed to start a new branch, and we needed a secure location to conduct your operation in secrecy. I was told Ayesha, personally, oversaw the negotiation. Don't take this the wrong way. Ganon may be loyal to the High Court, but he doesn't get along well with the current Tarina. He's not the only one who objected to the selection, but he may have the best reasoning. Wait, isn't she? Sam began. Acetyl Nazguli Ulmerton, Oleander answered the unasked question. She was born to rule and spent most of early life being passed from house to learn all she could. She's both the youngest leader we've ever had and was born to the two longest-lived families. Is he jealous or? I wasn't finished, Oleander chuckled. Houses Nazguli and Ulmerton have an ancient rivalry over some philosophical disagreement. I'm sure there's some explanation of how the former head of House Nazguli managed to stop quarreling long enough to impregnate the last Ulmerton matriarch, but I don't have high enough clearance to know it. Why, then? Sam asked. The age, the rivalry, or what? Sorry, Oleander laughed. I suspect it was lack of the favoritism he felt their shared bloodline entitled him to. Honestly, that's one of the many things I respect her for. Acetyl has only ever shown deference for the leader of one house. The one who arranged the punishment and pardon of Eris, now that I think of it. I may not like Malice Ryjuk, but I have to give him credit for how he earned the favor of Tarina. He refused to try, and when asked why, told her she wouldn't match the furniture. Sam looked at him in confusion as he laughed at a joke she hadn't caught. She was wearing imperial red, the exact same color as his furniture. Acetyl added House Ryjuk to the list of great houses within the week. She countered any objections by insisting that developing a sense of humor, and not pursuing power for its own sake, are both worthy aspirations. She's not wrong. We do tend to take ourselves far too seriously. So, when can I leave? Sam sighed. If Fury wasn't prone to spontaneous abortions, we could leave any time. I am sorry you're stuck here with me. We're stuck here at the same time, not together, Sam balked. This is the first day I've seen you since we got here. It would be better if I was stuck here with you, but I'm not, am I? A scraping noise, followed by a loud clank, sounded behind Oleander. I think we've been noticed, Oleander smiled as the door began to open. He seemed relieved, but she had no intention to let him slither away this time. He'd carried on and on about the former Samari and his interest in her body's new host. Was any of it true, or was he just playing with her heartstrings for sport? She needed to be more careful who she allowed herself to get close to. She couldn't rely on her shadow to take charge anymore. There had to be some way to balance Kayla's need to be wanted, Kivaza's inability to trust, and the conflicting loyalties she'd inherited from Samari's body. The rumbling collective within the recesses of her mind was only complicating things further. She couldn't help but wonder, if a telepath asked who she really was, what answer wouldn't feel deceptive? As Kieryu once said, a name doesn't define you. It's just what people call you. It may not be a direct quote, but her point was more poignant now than it was at the time. How long are you two going to just stand there? A voice called from beyond the doorway. As long as it takes, Oleander balked. Care to elaborate? The deep male voice said from within the room. I don't like this. What are the Lamentics hiding? Sam thought without regard for her audience. Hopefully the collective wouldn't She's voiced a desire to leave, and a reluctance to meet with you. I await her decision, Oleander said in an unusually formal tone. Oh, I've decided, Sam grinned as she pushed past Oleander and strode into the room. Gannon had been the head of the fifth most influential house for nearly 500 years, despite looking like he was in his early 30s. His meeting room was large and sparsely furnished. From the swords mounted on the wall behind his throne-like chair, to the softly glowing spheres lining the walls, the decor was designed to openly display his power and authority, while passively intimidating anyone who entered his presence. He was more muscular than Oleander, with sharper features. She immediately knew why Oleander didn't get along well with Gannon. Oleander, with his long locks, may look like he stepped off the cover of some trashy romance novel, but Gannon looked like the swashbuckling, short-haired rogue from a very different sort of story. The slender scar just above his left cheekbone was distracting. In that story, would he be the dashing hero or the villain who was too attractive to hate? Sam understood why Briar had picked him as her first person to visit if they removed the restriction of being UN perfected. Sam struggled momentarily to maintain her composure under the intensity of his smoldering gaze. Is Briar still here? Samari asked, hoping it would rattle him. He absent-mindedly traced the scar with 2 fingers while answering. She couldn't stay long, but we had a nice conversation. Gannon's eyes darted toward the mounted swords as he spoke. Apparently, they both preferred to let their blades speak for them. They really were a good match. It was a shame nothing could come of it. Who won? Sam asked, while trying to force a more casual mood. She always comes out on top, he said without hesitation. Sam suspected he had no idea how the woman regarded him, otherwise he'd have chosen words without the sexual connotation. Then again, he may be trying to keep her from feeling like she could get the upper hand in their conversation. Swift retorts and riposte have long been part of dueling, whether it was with words or steel never seemed to matter. I didn't remember your name, but did I ever thank you for your assistance during the last gala? Gannon baited. That was the former Samari, she said through bared teeth while trying to sound calm. You're a lamentic. You should know better than to mistake the container for the spirit it holds. Good bit of advice, he said with a grin while looking past her at Oleander. That settled it. He was definitely the villain. This wasn't really about her. He was just using her to put Oleander in his place, and she'd stumbled right into his trap. Lamentics don't kill lamentics, not directly at least. Due to his station, Oleander couldn't defend himself, and complaining about things Gannon hadn't said would be fruitless. It couldn't be that simple. How much of their conversation had Gannon overheard? Surely, he wasn't trying to provoke her, counting on Sam's oath ring to kill her. No, she was no lamentic. If he wanted her head, he could try to take it with his own hands. He must be hoping to provoke Oleander into saying or doing something that would damage his standing within their societal structure. Maybe she was looking at this all wrong. The child doesn't exist. Lamentics don't kill lamentics. A child could bring disgrace to an entire family line. Chimeric children were meant to be slain at birth for killing their unborn twin in utero. If word got out that a family was sheltering such a child, Oleander had met the orphaned twins she adopted. I'm leaving, Sam said forcefully. Really? Gannon snickered. Is that why you were asking about Briar? I already told you, I can't leave yet. Oleander let out an exasperated sigh. I don't need you, Sam taunted. I can find my own way. She made a big display of storming out of the room. No, she heard Gannon say in the distance, let her go. I want to see what she's going to do. Sam smiled. She had a plan, which hinged on the answer to a single question. Is it possible to steal away with something, or someone, that doesn't exist? She was looking forward to discovering the answer. Heine Fasruck. She'd been born into a lamentic family which would be treated as a minor house were it not for the famed beauty of its women. With her distinctly masculine facial features, diminutive breasts, and non-existent curves, Haina was the exception which threatened to shatter that paradigm. Her entire family had pampered her throughout her early life. They understood that being an outlier would be a curse, not a blessing. Her affinity for the mystic arts wasn't even strong enough to entitle her to a leech, but she'd learned all she could to compensate for her biological limitations. Despite the number of men who approached her seeking an introduction to one of her sisters, she refused to succumb to the heartache and become jaded. When Kyeyu approached her and offered to pay her to meet someone at Yarrow's, she expected it would be more of the same. Much to her surprise, the request was simply to bring someone home to Hyrule through the curtain. It was certainly unusual, more so that it wasn't even a lamentic making the request, just someone who had been stranded there, with a child, apparently. It sounded like a custodial exchange gone wrong to her. She really wanted to know how an outsider had ended up in such a dire predicament, but that hadn't stopped her from making sure she was well paid while sating her curiosity. The High Court had a permanent lease of VIP Room 9 at the club, but she wasn't on the list, which meant she'd have to meet with Lei Shah Delphani before being granted access to the main floor. It was mostly a formality, but still inconvenient. Lampharian hybrid or not, Lei Shah was still part Lamentic, which made negotiation likely. Being a low-ranked member of House Fasruk didn't entitle her to any more special treatment than House Delphani granted Lei Shah. They weren't quite equals, but close. She'd likely owe the other woman a favor before the day was done, and made sure her compensation from Alliance Arms reflected the anticipated hassle. Upon her arrival, Haina was led to the security office by a Mycor named Farha Jewel. She'd read about the predominantly quadrupedal canine species, but he was the first she'd seen in person. According to the text, they weren't simply rare, but from some realm beyond Corrales. Without their periodic visitation to this reality, the Lupians would have gone extinct as a result of a genetic bottleneck thousands of years ago. It was useless trivial knowledge, but it saddened her to learn they had no memory of their true origin. Then again, who's to say if those ancient records are at all accurate? It's sad how much tended to be lost in translation over the ages. "Good, you're here," Lei Shah said from behind an imposing desk. "Farha Jewel will lead you to the curtain and wait for your return. You will not be announced when you arrive. This needs to all be handled quickly and quietly. Don't dawdle." Haina was caught off guard by the woman's dark hair, features, and complexion. The disgrace of House Delphani was a cautionary tale shared with all Lamentic youth, but hearing the stories wasn't nearly as alarming as seeing the results. If she hadn't known who she was meeting, Haina wouldn't have suspected this woman had a drop of the old blood. Maybe that was for the best. The last time a Delphani had real authority, they nearly bankrupted the empire. Luckily, the leaders of House Kalvraj strangled the cash flow until Tsar Delphani was forced from power. That was back in the Second Age of Corrales, millions of years ago. Lei Shah's hair was as dark as the stain on her family's name. "I don't understand," Haina said as a small envelope was slid across the table toward her. She stared down, dumbfounded, at the official insignia of the High Court emblazoned on the front of the sealed envelope. "I'm not an executioner," Haina stammered. "I can't." "Can't what? Follow directions," the dark-haired woman scoffed. "When you get there, just bring that to Yarrow, and keep your tongue stiller than Farha Jewel's tail." Yarrow was the eldest son of Don Kalvraj, the defenders of purse strings of the empire. Lei Shah must be striving to restore some of the respect her family once held by submitting to the house that brought on the downfall of her ancestors. Honestly, they'd probably be better off being absorbed into Shamfarian culture and abandoning any hopes of restoring former glory to their family name. "How many times do I have to tell you to keep your tail wind away from my paperwork?" Lei Shah scolded him. "Sorry," the wolfish guard said, realizing how vigorously his tail was wagging. He may have lowered his head, but his grin was unmistakable. "One more thing," Lei Shah asked as Haina followed Farha Jewel to the door, "if I need a runner between here and Yarrow's in the future, may I call on you?" "No, not unless you're skilled in the art of bribery," Heine said dryly. My time is very valuable. She held the envelope tightly within a fold of her dress as she followed the guard through the crowded club, toward the large red curtains at the back of the former opera house. She could make out the movements of other guards clearing the way as they continued. Farher Jul's presence was truly menacing. The riffraff was quick to part for him, although he did stand once to ensure a cluster of drunken Lupians dispersed. Their conversation ended swiftly. Heine knew better than to ask. Many of the lesser species just didn't know their place. The High Court naturally understood and exploited their usefulness, but letting them know what we really thought of them would lead to conflict and reduced compliance. I wait here, the guard intoned as they stood across from the curtain to Yarrow's. His speech was slow and deliberate. Thank you, Heine said as she stepped through the curtain and started down the pathway to Yarrow's. On the other side was a walkway connecting two ends of the folded space corridor. The technology predated the Lementic Empire, but only they understood and maintained it. She took a deep breath as she stepped through the second curtain. A few faceless Lementics were working at Yarrow's. It was forced servitude, reserved for criminals. They all wore identical helmets and not much else. It was forbidden to speak to them, ask them any questions, or take any actions that would regard them as actual people. All it would take was a single action which made the court look bad and she'd be counted among their number. And here she was, acting as an executioner for a day. She merely needed to follow instructions, just like at work, but with higher personal stakes. Being prideful is natural, being haughty is not. She ignored the faceless as she walked to the bar which was the centerpiece of Yarrow's. It was easy to find her quarry due to her dark complexion and the young child with pointed ears sitting across from them. The ears were a rare deformity among young Lementic children, easily corrected with medical intervention. Heine was a little disturbed by the beverage in front of the child. Alcohol. For one so young. It's Etrelani berry. It won't hurt her, said the bald-headed woman. The child was certainly enjoying it, sitting there swinging her legs as she inhaled deeply. Introduce yourself. I'm Cass, the child said, turning their head. Oh honey, you're not broken. You're, Heine responded. The child turned her head, revealing blackish cracks along her face. Heine took a half step back. That's Drolfarge, isn't it? She gasped. Yes. She's a survivor. Just like me. But you're Samsaran, aren't you? Heine asked. This time, the woman smiled. The name of the species comes from the word samsara, which is the cycle of death and rebirth. This isn't my first time around. Yarrow wandered by, placing another drink in front of the child. Another juice for the little one? The little girl said, please and thank you. Last one okay, the woman said warmly but sternly, I don't want to keep Yuri waiting too long. Do you think it's all right to give them? Wait a moment, Yuri. I'm raising a pair of Zargalteam, Sam said to Yarrow. Twin boys actually. They're outcasts too. I wouldn't exactly call that child an outcast, he laughed. She turned her attention back to Heine and added, my family used to grow Etrelani berries in the garden. It's fine, Sam said. If it was what you think it is, I'd be a drunkard. Unfortunately, I don't have a taste for it in this. As I am now. Heine had been warned about him. Yarrow loved rumors, the more outlandish the better. This made him an unreliable source of information. It seemed the Terran was enjoying playing his game. Yarrow looked up over at Heine and said, well, they're all yours. Get them out of here, and remember, no questions. I appreciate you coming. And, don't touch the child. For your own good, Sam insisted. Is it contagious? Heine asked. No, it's fine, Sam responded, but I wouldn't touch her either way. Not if I were you, at least. The child looked like an unloved doll. Their hair looked as if it was cut with a dull pocket knife, uneven and unkempt, but at last it hid most of the child's scarring. Their eyes almost appeared to glow. With a silvery brightness unlike the dull grey of most Lementics. They'd almost be pretty if it wasn't for the dark cracks along the side of their face. The marks almost looked damp. They looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped a few too many times. Despite Sam's warnings, Heine reached a finger towards the child's face. "Does it hurt?" "Yes, very much," the child responded. Heine gently touched a crack on the child's face, and jerked her hand back with a yelp. "I told you it hurts," the little girl insisted. "And I warned her not to touch it," Sam smirked. "It will hurt less if you get the residue off. Don't worry, Cass, I'll hold your hand. I thought lamentics were more resilient than that." "I'm not eligible for a leech, so I've never built up a tolerance," Heine objected. "Finish your juice," Samari said. "We should get moving. By the way, Heine was it?" Heine nodded. "Which guard was assigned to you?" Sam asked. "Leisha called him Fahadul, I think." Heine answered. "Oh, he's a big boy," Sam smiled then pouted. "It's a shame he won't recognize me without my tails." "Never mind, don't ask." "I wouldn't dream of it," Heine insisted falteringly.